Everybody, welcome to week 167. Oh, this one's gonna be fun. Talking about partnership agreements. Let's spit it out here. And we've got some current events. We got some polls. This is gonna be fun. And Adam is dialing in from Florida on vacation. Now that is a dedicated man. You will not see such dedication from me next week because I'm going to be with my family at the beach celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary a month early. So anyway, Jack has some current events, things to talk about. Adam, anything you want to say on the front end before Jack goes into some of his current topics?
Not too much. I'm in Sarasota, Florida, which I did not know this, but evidently this was the home of the Ringling Brothers Circus.
Oh,
and there's a lot that they did that was good for the community, which made me think, man, circuses used to be really big. They generated like all this money that they could then do all these philanthropic things around this town. So yeah, no, I didn't have a whole lot this week. I think the more, I think there still just continues to be a lot of uncertainty out there. On the one hand, you hear about big companies, making layoffs, and you think maybe I'm missing out on something. Then on the other hand, you think, well, there's a reason I don't work for a big company. So it's a hard, it's a hard one to say. So anywho, that's all I got, Gary.
Well, one thing that I'll add on that is with your son being a SCAD guy, Ringling School of Art and Design or College of Art and Design is also in Sarasota. And I've hired some in my past, some pretty talented people from that college. That's a pretty sharp college too. So isn't that cool? The ripple effect of business owners.
That's right. That's right.
I love seeing when people invest in their communities. I love it.
Yep.
That's good. All right. So Jack, you've got some current events that you want to take us through, and then we'll go into some polls and we'll go into some partnership war stories.
I do. A couple of personal notes though for you, Adam. Waterworks down there is a pretty cool little place to go have a drink. Downtown Sarasota is a cute little town. We have an office in Sarasota. And then if you make it over to Siesta Key, there's a place
that's
called
where we're staying at.
Okay, Meanie's Mini Donuts.
And ooh, I've seen it.
Okay. I didn't think you could make donuts more unhealthy than they already are inherently, but they take the donut and vary whatever flavor you want that they have on the menu, and that becomes the crust of your ice cream sundae. And then they build up an ice cream sundae, and it ends up being like this big. So come with an appetite, be prepared to get into a sugar coma if you do that. But it was very yummy when I was down there, and I felt it for about 2 days, even after exercising. But I thought that the pre-exercise burning off calories the morning of would be sufficient. It wasn't. So enjoy that while you're down there, because apparently it's the beach thing to do.
Yeah, that is funny. So the one thing I will say, so I appreciate that. I've seen Meanies, but I have not stopped in. The one thing that I would say, that's kind of on point, which is what we're seeing out there, is with the back to work stuff, is that as I was leaving, I was in one of our colleagues' offices, and I saw her collection of her library of business books. She's a good reader. We have a lot of the same taste. And while I've often cited the 4-hour work week, I've never actually read it. So, because I like Tim Ferriss, so I saw it on the shelf. And I just asked, hey, can I take 4-hour work week, Stephanie? She's like, yeah, absolutely. So I read it. And, the book, I think, was originally written probably 2006 or so. And, the whole, obviously, 4-hour work week is, how can you get to the point where you're only focused on critical tasks? And if you're only focused on critical tasks, could you make a living in 4 hours a week? The author, Tim Ferriss, seems to think yes. But where that fits into remote working is that part of the strategy is to negotiate and I use the word negotiate, Gary, the ability to work remotely if you're a salaried employee. And the way that you do that is by being a super producer and over efficient and trying a little series of experiments and pilots to show that you're capable and nothing will fall through the cracks. So my point in saying that is that, love the flexibility, love the remote, love the ability to work anywhere. We've already said what the BGW policy is, which is we need people in the office to train the new people, but we're still, provide flexibility. So that's, however many days it takes to do that is however many days we do it. But what I did find interesting is that, really Tim Ferriss's teachings were to establish what it means to be productive and prove that you can be as productive, if not more productive, from home or from a remote location, which I think has sort of been like the missing ingredient of, in other words, like, I don't know how in our world it'd be tax returns and financial statements, the counts are still the same, just if I was to use what's the widget number, there may be something equivalent in Jack's world, but for the people that are still struggling, out there with, what's my remote, what, if anything, do I need to do to enhance my remote working policy? To be human, not be a jerk, but at the same time, still make sure that I'm keeping the pedal down on the productivity. I just found it interesting that a book written pre-pandemic, kind of had the answer that was in front of us all along that we just haven't done anything with.
I've just added that to my book list I keep a task list on Outlook of books that I want to read, which really in this day and age means listen to in the car on 1.4, 1.5x. So I can get through a 10-hour book in 6 hours. So
there you go.
Thank you for sharing.
You got
All
it,
right.
buddy.
So a couple things to chat about. I feel like that the past couple of weeks I've kind of punted on bringing everybody up on current events. So I'm going to revert back to that a little bit and some things that you've probably heard of. But I think earlier this week, as an example of some of the things we've talked about in the past regarding getting caught for fraudulent applications for PPP money or EIDL money. A local business person indicted, his name is Glenn Hubbard, on charges that he schemed more than 1.2 million from the government's COVID relief funds, and that he submitted fraudulent applications for both PPP and EIDL applications to the SBA to get those funds. And so more to come on that because it's just an indictment. They haven't gone through the trials and everything else, but rest assured that he is one of many. It's just that he happens to be a local person that did this. But yes, they are going and trying to find people who fraudulently or defrauded the federal government to get some of that money back. You've probably also heard about the UPS strike. What was interesting, and the reason why I bring that up is I had not really considered, I'm like, okay, UPS strike, maybe FedEx picks up the slack, maybe Amazon picks up the slack, but UPS is a much bigger organization than I thought, and I think that most people thought, and not just for packages of stuff, but UPS, like other carriers, deliver very important things like medicine to different places and other essential items. And so not only is there a disruption to supply chain and things like that, disruptions to essential and important and emergent services and products being shipped all around the country and all around the world. So hopefully, I think August 1st is the deadline for the strike. And it seems like that UPS has come back to the negotiating table where they're remaining pretty adamant. So I think that they are feeling the pinch and the consequences of threatening to walk away from the table, which I think they did for a short period of time. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the recent cyber attack that was targeted against the essentially federal agencies. and it was pretty widespread. It doesn't appear that it was specific to a specific agency, so it was kind of widespread. What was interesting also is that, as we are in discussions with China to try to smooth things over for calling them names on international television and press conferences, that this happened. And so there is a concerted effort, but it's and we've talked about cyber attacks recently, and how easy it is for people to be pulled into these things, and how patient the cyber attackers can be. So apparently this particular attack had been in the works for a significant period of time, and then they pulled the trigger on the attack. But it wasn't something that just happened overnight. It's very methodical. And so just kind of reiterating some of the things we talked about in prior weeks. So that's what I got for current events.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. May your life be interesting. I think we're living that, and we have been. Last 3 years in particular have been quite interesting. UPS is interesting too, because I did work with the UPS store, and so I worked with some of the guys at UPS, and they were pretty militant about, like, even you couldn't have any personal items in your cube. And this was back, in early 2000s. It was, so we'll see how that rolls. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll just for grins and giggles, and it's about partnerships and partnership agreements. Okay, so you guys, to make this fun, you have to participate. So I just launched the poll. First question is, are you or have you been in a business partnership? So I'm curious about this audience that we've got online here today. So please answer yes, no, or I'd like to be. So we've got one brave soul out of 15 who is, if you would, please participate. Otherwise, this is not going to be any fun. The second question, how was or is your partnership experience? Heaven on earth? I hope hell isn't as bad as what I've experienced, or tough but worth it. And the third one, and actually I've been in the second one. And then, do you currently have a formal written partnership agreement in place? Like written, not just in between your head, your ears. No, but we trust each other, so we don't need one. You might want to re-listen to last week. No, but after last week's session, I realized we need one. All right, cool. So a lot of people have formal written partnership agreements. Good. That's a very good thing. The one who answered no, but we trust each other, so no need. We may want to talk. And this is really good. I'm surprised. Look at this. 8 out of 8 people that have ventured onto this poll, half of them say heaven on earth, which that is an amazing thing. The tough but worth it, I have seen that. And I still believe in partnerships, even though my wife would say, Now she did acquiesce because I became a partner at BGW. So but 4 years or almost a courting was probably good with this one. But so pretty interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and last call. If anybody wants to get in on this one, answer. And I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I'm going to share the results. So 5 of the 8 that answered yes in one or have been in a partnership. Half of you guys said heaven on earth. Half of you said tough but worth it. I still I believe that tough but worth it. If you got heaven on earth, man, you got something special, because it's always hard. And 6 out of the 8 have partnership agreements in place. and 2 don't. 1 said, yeah, we probably need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And there we go. So Adam or Jack, would you have any of those numbers surprise you?
Now, I would say not really. The one thing I want to reiterate at the outset is that when we talk about partnerships, we're talking generically, and but it's also talking about the specifics. So a partnership agreement in the form of an operating agreement or a shareholders agreement. The specificity is, okay, are you talking about partnership law? Are you talking about partnership tax law? And from a pure partnership law perspective, you do not have to have a written agreement to have created a partnership. And I'm saying that that is not a good thing, not that it's a good thing. And meaning that if the 3 of us go out and we represent ourselves as being partners in a business, and we may say, okay, hey, look, you know what? Adam's the money guy, and so he's putting the risk in. Gary's the worker, and I'm the relationship person. Which actually, Gary, you should be the relationship person. So I'm the worker.
All right, I'll be the relationship,
because you know everybody. And so, but people, outsiders, don't know that relationship, and so I basically, in utilizing Adam's money that has been invested in the business, make some business decisions where I may not have as much financial skin in the game. And I make promises, I sign contracts on behalf of our partnership in our partnership name, regardless of whether it's legally formed with the state of North Carolina as a limited partnership, as an LLC, or whatever it may be, or corporation. And that person on the other side assumes that I have authority to bind the partnership, and therefore bind each of you, the 2 of you, to the decision that I've made. And so if you were to look voyeuristically into a lawsuit and we were getting sued, it would have all of us, it would have the partnership name, and it would have the 3 of us individually as defendants, because we've represented each other out as essentially a general partnership, not a limited partnership. And so that's one of the reasons why you want to have an agreement in place. There's obviously lots of other reasons, but that is the kind of the paramount starting point as to why you want something in writing, so that it is established what the liabilities are with each other, as between each other, and so that I don't put yourselves, everyone else on the line. Similarly, in a professional services corporation like a medical practice, you have a certain type of liability that is partnership-like, but then you have protections that are created because you have a professional association, you have a PLLC, and those kind of, so that brings back protections into what would otherwise be treated like a general partnership, as amongst doctors and others. And so, and then you have professional liability insurance to kind of topically bolster that. So that's kind of my initial comment is that you may, as between yourselves or ourselves, say, okay, my liability is limited because I'm not really making decisions. I'm out there hustling, bringing in business, but it's really, Gary's and Adam's business, because they put in more equity into the business, whether it's sweat equity or actual monetary equity. And it's not going to matter in the eyes of others if you don't have something in writing. So just a forewarning into those who said, yeah, okay, still believe, and I appreciate this belief in gentlemen's and ladies arrangements into business relationships.
That's a cautionary tale, for sure.
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of Jack's comments that the biggest probably this, I'd be curious to get your take on this, Jack. I mean, the biggest single problem that we see in our world is with, the partnership breakup is going to happen. Like we're not going to resolve things. We're just at loggerheads, and one partner wants to initiate a buyout of another partner, and the method and valuation mechanics for doing that aren't there. And related to that, hey, Gary, you're a great guy. I'm going to give you, 25% of the company for your hard work at zero value. Because you're trying to make sure this doesn't create this big taxable consequence for Gary. So he got, something for nothing. He would say, well, I got underpaid. That's what I got. That was my sweat equity. So and then 5 years later, it's not working. And we're at loggerheads. And when we look at what the real value is to buy Gary out, going back to your phrase, Gary, of, it's like hell and I don't want to go back there. It's like, it's kind of amazing that some people will continue to put up with it for the next, for another 5 years. I'll just, hope and pray that maybe it gets better, or I'll suck it up and do it. There is an argument for life's too short, but that really is probably the single biggest struggle that we see with people in partnership agreements is there's just no clarity in terms of mechanics of what's the value.
So guys, here is why I like doing these sessions, because this, and I said it last week, kind of a what would you do scenario, and we were kind of, it's timely for us to have that kind of session so we can tell war stories. Because, well, first of all, you don't have to do a whole lot of preparation. You just have to have, recall in your head, the stories, and just remember to be anonymous about it and not say the company name or anything else, right? And so here's one for you. And here's what happens a lot of the time, which is, and we go into these relationships in a very trusting environment. And then you find a lawyer who says, all right, here's the generic document. And that lawyer really doesn't walk you through what each of those things mean. And as we talked about before, kind of the two main sections are, how is the business going to be managed? How is the partnership going to be managed? And what happens if somebody gets hit by a bus? Okay, so those are really two very kind of really core concepts that go within. So focusing on the first one is you have an agreement that says, well, okay, either it's member managed or manager managed. And in most cases, it really doesn't matter, because even if it's member managed, each of the members is named a manager. And just kind of a little bit of backtracking a little bit. A member, capital M, is the same as a shareholder. A manager, capital M, is the same as a director. And then you can have officers, et cetera. So you basically are saying that the mere fact that you're an equity owner also means that you're a director, okay? And most agreements will say that a director, a manager, can do anything they need to do in order to continue to efficiently operate the business. And a lot of times, that's all it says. The better agreements will say, okay, that's true, but when you get to certain benchmarks, whether it is the type of transaction, an M&A transaction, a loan to the company, or a loan extended by the company to someone else, let's say to an employee or to an owner or someone else, or there's a monetary amount that says, in the event that there is an anticipated expenditure of $5,000 or more, you need majority, 2 out of the 3, or you need unanimous. Unanimous is hard. Usually those are reserved for the really big things, like changing the operating agreement, changing the name of the company, S corp elections, whatever it may be. And so a lot of times you don't have that, those restrictions. And then one person, one of those managers, one of those members, one of those owners says, there's 2 variations of this, says, you know what? Actually 3 variations. You know what? I believe that I know what is best for the company, so I'm going to make a bet the farm decision and everything's going to be okay. The second variation of that is I'm doing what is in the best interest of the company, and I'm making an informed business decision, It's a pretty significant decision. I think my peeps will go with me. The third is, actually, let's do four. The third is that, again, best interest of the company. Hopefully it will work out and everyone will be happy. And the fourth is the belligerent, which is, I don't care about it. This is my company. I helped build it. I should be able to make this decision. Everything will turn out fine, and I will beg for forgiveness rather than permission. So those are kind of the four variations of what you have when you don't have specific language in an operating agreement or a partnership agreement, limited partner agreement, or a shareholders agreement. And you've given too much power inadvertently to make certain decisions. And so that's where we see a lot of the problems, which is, okay, I have a client that is an owner and says, this person did really bad stuff. And you kind of peel it away. And it's like, well, okay, was it intentionally bad? Well, no, he's just a dumbass. Well, okay, you can't sue somebody for being a dumbass. You have to sue them for something that is that they're responsible for, which is breach of fiduciary duty and those kind of things. So those are, and again, I'm pounding this too hard, is that you need to have a written agreement. But just because you have a written agreement doesn't mean that it is sufficient to deal with these issues. Take a look at what you get from LegalZoom. Take a look at what you get from an attorney who is licensed, but maybe there are a family law attorney who's trying to dabble into business law and says, good enough. Well, many times good enough is not good enough. And I think that's a commercial, and I think I owe someone some royalty at this point for having said that. So that's my take on that. Again, you might have something, but it may not be sufficient. So you probably need to take a look and see, put yourself in the scenario of being in the worst position and the worst interpretation of the language, and then see where you end up. And then that will help guide you as to whether or not you think you need to do something in relation to amending your current written agreement. I'm not suggesting that you be paranoid and think about all the what ifs. I do have clients that think that, and their operating agreements are 100 pages. But, when you're investing a couple $100 million into something, you want to make sure that all of the what ifs, or many of them, are handled. So.
Yeah, and before we go into some of the, we've all seen some nightmarish examples. I mean, and we've lived through them. I know enough of each of your stories, especially, so I'll just leave it at that. But I'll give an example of something where having the right operating agreement and succession plan in place made a massive difference. And so, and I'll use this name in particular, I won't use the name of the company, but Jeff Wolfberg, he has some cohorts. He has a thing called CEO Focus. And so think of Vistage groups kind of thing for business owners, and their peer-to-peer kind of advisory boards for each other. And he was pushing them really hard on operating agreements and succession plans, which both of them kind of go hand in hand. And one of his clients had dutifully done what he needed to do. He was in his mid-40s, and he died right before Christmas. Boom, like out of the blue, bad. Well, and his wife was, so she's got all the stock and whatever, and he'd done a number of roll-ups, but in the plan, and they had already agreed to this, Jeff Wolfberg was he was named to go in and operate this company. Well, not a lot of coaches actually can go do that, but he's equipped to do it. And he did, and it was pretty seamless, other than the trauma of a really good visionary CEO owner passing away in an untimely fashion. But it relieved the additional pressure that the wife didn't need on her shoulders at that point, while she's grieving the loss of her husband and father of her children. But they were able to continue things on. Now, that isn't always the case. that's really an exception. When I heard what had happened and how they were managing through it, and that happened, just a couple of years ago. So anyway, I think it really is important to have ambiguity like flushed out, because ambiguity ain't gonna serve anybody any well at all. So any questions from the gallery that you want to ask? And it doesn't have to necessarily be just on partnerships, agreements, et cetera. It can be on anything on tax, legal, and business growth as far as we're concerned. Hit us up if you do on the Q&A, and I'll monitor that. And Papa Joe must not be on here because he's not harassing us in the chat. So that's okay. And so I want both of you guys to think about a scenario where it went bad. What, after the post-mortem of, oh man, it went bad, what could have been done differently? But before that, I'm going to throw in a wild card, and this came to us through, oh, here we go. Okay, Trey. Yep, we will do that. Talk about the difference between legal structure and tax structure. So go ahead and do that, and then I'll throw in another wild card.
You want me to start on the legal side, and then you can get into the tax side?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you probably can cover both of them, because
Yeah, I know, but
we always follow your prescribed approach.
Right. So, okay. I would say, as a general statement, entity selection is tax driven, not legal driven, which might be a shock to many, because it seems to be a shock to many when I make that statement to clients. So what I mean by that is, I can form any entity that you want. There may be some restrictions, like if you are not a U.S. citizen, then it's not going to be an S corporation, most likely. So, but within that, we can do a C corp, we can do an S corp, we can do a partnership, we can do a limited partnership, we can do an LLC, we can do a professional LLC, we can do a PA, we can do a PC. So, all those things we can do. The reality is that we need to understand, and BGW needs to understand what your purposes are and where you want to go from this point moving forward, so that well, let me also say that I form more LLCs than I do anything else in recent years. I have my partner, I've mentioned before, who wrote the LLC Act, or rewrote it in 2014. He just, if you talk to him about corporations, he's like, sure, don't even talk to me about that. Now, he will discuss C corporation tax within an LLC entity, but so you choose the entity, and then you roll with what the rules and regulations are with respect to that. So, for example, in an LLC, I look at it as the highest freedom of contract. What I mean by that is, and I've said this before, unless it's illegal or against public policy, you can say whatever you want in that agreement. If it requires you to wear a yellow tie on every odd numbered Tuesday, and you don't, and there's consequences for that, then likely enforceable. Now, are the consequences ridiculous so that it's basically taking away a right that you shouldn't have taken away from you? That's a separate issue. But what happens is that we form the legal entity, and then you have to make a choice. Do you go with what the default is, or do you make a selection to do something differently? If you are a single member LLC, the default is a sole proprietorship. 2-member LLC, default is a partnership, okay, 2 or more. So you can adjust those defaults to have your LLC be taxed as a C corporation, which is unusual unless you're dealing with potentially a foreign entity or some other complicated tax issues that you don't want, you carry over losses and those kind of things. And then now I'm getting into your stuff. Sorry, I'll stop in a second. And then,
You must have stayed at a Holiday Inn Express.
Yeah, I know. I'm all jazzed up. I had this cherry flavored coffee from, we were up at Mackinac Island and up at Traverse City, and it's really good, but it must have a lot of caffeine in it. All right. And then, or you can, the LLC can choose, well, the default is partnership, C corporation, S corporation. So you have choices. Now, why would you choose those alternative formats? And here we have a very experienced CPA that will go into explaining that.
Yeah, so, we're generally, we generally follow the advice that Jack laid out, which is limited liability company provides you the most flexibility because then it's the only option available that then gives you the choice of three taxation options. Technically four, I guess, if you go the sole proprietorship taxation route. So, generally, our default's going to be, um, if your plan is you're going to uh, pretty quickly seek outside investment, especially if it's going to be more institutional investment, you kind of pretty much ruling it out S corporation at that point because only individual people can own an S corporation and some certain amount of trust. So like private equity firm can't own an S corporation. So you're going to have to do a bunch of restructuring, jump to a bunch of hoops. So if your plan is I'm going to get some outside investment, we're typically going to say just suck it up, be a partnership or a C corporation out of the gate. If your plan is then that you're not really planning on distributing profits, you plan on refueling growth through profits and retaining all your earnings, and you make something, so there's some sort of intellectual property in there, or alternatively you're clearly not a specialized service business under is defined by the tax code, which me and Jack are, but most everything else is not. Then a lot of times we're going to actually recommend C corporations because there's a feature in the tax code where you can exclude part of the gain within there when you go to sell. If your LLC and the plan is, hey, we're going to be partners, but we're all gonna eat what we earn, then not divide up the loot based on equity, then generally we're probably going to favor a partnership because you have flexibility in terms of how you allocate profits and losses, as long as it's not egregious relative to economic interest in the company. So it's just, S corporations, do work. They work really well, but they work really well when it's pretty predictable, it's pretty stable. And pretty much my plan is I'm going to bleed every nickel out of this place and bleed it out as a cash distribution. I'm pretty comfortable with the way the ownership is, and that's how the money is going to come out. If that's your route, S corporation taxes and S corporation is the way to go. That's not your route. One of the other options is typically going to be better. And the good news is you can always change it if the entity that you have isn't working. There are some tax consequences, but we can typically figure those out.
So while we're on that little subject, this is off of partnership agreements a little bit, and it's definitely not partnership war stories, but let's say somebody has been having their, somebody's ringing their doorbell saying, hey, you ought to consider selling this business. It's private equity ringing the doorbell, but you are not, and let's say that you're structured as an S corp, and you're starting to entertain that possibility. What should you be doing before all of a sudden you have to scramble?
Really, I mean, other than making sure that you still are an S corporation, that's about it. Because it's funny, like not, I don't know. Like
there's a story
Jack
there.
Jack will laugh at this because he knows it's true. It's like due diligence always comes down to like, what are the mountains that are molehills? It's never like product liability or like, true things that could really screw you. It's, sir, there's a chance that you blew your S election. Sir, there's a chance that you should have filed a tax return in such and such a state that otherwise, you may go to jail if you don't. Like, it's always the freaking tax. It's never something legal that ends up like being the source of the deal calls. when I found something. You guys can't see this because I'm talking, but Jack's nodding his head. He's like, yeah, that's true. Like, we don't tell anybody that, but that's totally true. So, the first thing is just make sure you have a bull in your eye selection. But outside of that, it's just more around, we've talked about this in webinars from a long time ago. It's that, when you get an offer and somebody says, hey, we're going to buy your stock, just know that they're not. Like, that's not how the deal is going to end. It's going to end as, even if they're buying stock, treated as an asset deal. So the tax is going to get complicated. And especially if you're doing rollover equity, I'm not going to get really wonky, but there's going to be some restructuring crap that has to happen.
So two things. I feel like I've told some kind of doomsday negative stories. So I would like to tell a positive story now, which is similar to what Gary said, which is we recently had a client who, because I had the opportunity, and they are franchisor clients, but through some M&A transactions, had the opportunity to look into their governance documents and said, hey, let's talk about some of these things. They were kind of light on the kind of the two core things that we've been talking about, which is succession planning, exit planning, hit by a bus, and then also the governance aspect of that. At the time, they had an outsider, meaning someone who wasn't actually a family member. So there was just some concern that we need to make sure that everybody's doing. And I said, and I hate to bring this up, I said, what happens if the two of you kind of part ways and you have a business together? You want to make sure that someone doesn't be retaliatory and vindictive and do certain things, because basically each of you can do whatever you want with the company and its bank accounts, essentially. So we were able to fix that. And then, down the road, and unfortunately, recently, one of those spouses passed away. And, I hadn't heard from the surviving spouse, and we're in the middle of a transaction on something else. And there was an apology that, sorry, I haven't spoken with you or replied back to you because he actually passed away. It was an illness that came on pretty quickly and very aggressively. It was cancer, and unexpectedly. But, one of the good aspects on the business side of things was they had everything in order. And so I basically wrote her back and I said, hey, look, you know what, we're good to go. We got through all this. We made the fixes, and I got your back. And then her response was, thank you so much. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I said, take your time. Nothing, it's, you deal with what you need to deal with, and I'll be here when you're ready. So, a tragic situation, but from a business perspective, it will turn out well because of the foresight of having done it correctly, but only because we kind of took a look at it and saw what it was about. So, with respect to just generally speaking on we really didn't talk about partnerships in the sense of mergers, but Adam was kind of touching on that by saying, okay, that what happens in a transaction when you're bringing two together, and are you really taking on stock, meaning full ownership, all assets, all liabilities, or really an asset purchase? What I see many times, is that when you're bringing parties together and you're saying it's really a merger, and you're bringing together certain assets and liabilities. And a lot of times you'll say, okay, prior to merger, each company is going to pay these liabilities off using its own cash before you kind of bring the marriage together. And sometimes there is just not, I shouldn't say full disclosure, but maybe a full understanding of what you're getting into. And at that point, that you're bringing things together and you're trying to marry who can do what, there is a presumption that if you feel like you're on equal footing, that there should be equality in decision making. Translated to, we're not going to address that because we should be able to trust each other at the outset of this wonderful new relationship. And that is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. Similarly to when you go into business with anybody and you're building these rules, the rule book of who can do what, you should also do that in the relationship. Now, more assertive and experienced merger partners will definitely go through all of that and have that very explicit. each side has a board member on the board, and how do you deal with deadlocks and those kind of things. But in a less sophisticated transaction, when you're not dealing with private equity groups, et cetera, you're going to find that there is, I don't want to call it intellectual laziness. I think it's just there's so much going on. You don't think about these things. And obviously you're going into supposedly a trusting relationship. And so, it feels uncomfortable to say, well, what happens if we have a disagreement? What happens if we bring on our assets and it's real estate, and then there's a decision that needs to be made as to whether we're going to sell it, are we going to put some capital improvements into it, et cetera. And it needs to be, we don't want you who is not familiar with the property to make certain decisions. So sometimes it gets very granular. So something that we hadn't talked about is kind of in the merger context of setting up these rules as between the new kind of joint ownership.
That teased me into another kind of a tangent on something that worked that I think could help, but I want to address Kirk's question first. So here's the scenario. As soon as the VC markets improve, we'll be going after 30 million to 50 million in private investments, TBD. Some of our prospects are insisting that we stay organized as an LLC for tax purposes. Others are insisting that we organize as a C Corp. Any thoughts and considerations? A really good question.
Yeah. So the private equity company will end up dictating what you're going to end up being as the target, because they'll have some sort of investment policy which dictates what it is that they can acquire. From that standpoint, though, like I wouldn't change anything. I mean, meaning like if you're already a partnership, there's not a tax downside of that, because if you had to reorg into a C corporation, it's not that big of a deal. So I probably would have just stayed as a partnership and then just because that's leaving the flexibility on the table. The only potential reason I might not do that is if the possibility of code section 1202 might be in place, which would be the gain exclusion. But even then, at the point that you're forming up with private equity, that would potentially start the meter under 5-year holding period to take advantage of that tax code. And that's where, probably I wouldn't want to be a C corporation. So that's a long way of saying, I don't know if I'd do much today.
Yeah, I was gonna, I knew you would throw it in the 1202 section, because we had a similar kind of request. There was a romance going on between private equity and the client, but there was not really a significant commitment. It was like, hey, in order to be a candidate down the road, we'd like you to go ahead and in order to start that 5-year clock ticking. And the client, once we explain that to them, kind of what that means and potentially what it means to become a C corporation based on what they've done and what they've built, they were not interested in doing that unless there was a commitment by private equity to buy, and there just wasn't. So, to the comment about when the markets get better, that might be a more appropriate time to have a discussion. But even then, without a commitment, I don't know if a business would be willing to do that just to become more attractive to potential investors on an acquisition.
So I want to go into a scenario, and Gerald Broussard, who I see on here, is a partner in a company with me. Good guy. He was one of the early guys of Administaff, which is now Insperity. And so really talented guy. But we did an acquisition in California when I was in this private equity firm. And we were doing roll-ups to really behave like a multifamily office for very wealthy families. And this particular office out in California had some very, very notable names that I will not mention, multi-generation, and very storied and very good reputation out there. But they were very intrigued by our model. And so what we did is we did a 2-day offsite with their management team and our management team, and it was an acquisition. But it was also like they were older, and in some ways they were more mature than that particular, like than what we had currently. And so we did a 100-day plan, and we got deep into cultural compatibility, which is usually not addressed. and it's like, oh, it'll be great. You guys are great people. We're great people. It's going to be wonderful. We got into the nitty gritty on, is this going to be a culturally compatible scenario or not? And then we got into who, with the 100-day plan, who occupies what seats in the new structure. A lot of times it's like, oh, we'll figure that out. Not good, because that's when things really sour. And then after we got into the nitty gritty on that, we did thumbs up, thumbs down on the deal with those two management teams. And that acquisition was like the best one that I've experienced, because we dealt with the hard stuff and the kind of awkward conversations up front, because like, hey, well, who's going to actually have a seat at the table on the management team? I mean, those kind of questions that people like, don't worry about that. Let's just get this deal done. The numbers look good. It's going to be wonderful. Danger, Will Robinson. So anyway, another one of those where I thought, hey, I've lived through one where it was really good. They took our name, which was a big deal. And we gave them, we created a new name that still worked with the holding company, but it also tipped the hat to theirs. And so we created a division, and they were the head of that group. They still have it. And our firm blew up in 2009, but they're, so it says a lot about them as people. But anyway, I just think a process like that, if you don't know somebody to take you through it, you can call us and we can help you. But that's a big deal. An ounce of prevention is worth about 20 pounds of cure, isn't it? Good question by Kurt. Go ahead.
Absolutely. The other thing I wanted to share too, like, we keep on talking about doom and gloom scenarios. It really, at the end of the day, though, it's like, well, so what's the best prescription? You absolutely should focus on making sure you got your bases covered in terms of risk prevention. But I think, if I was to boil down to what are my years of experience in dealing with partnership problems, boil down to, I'm going to not swear, but if I was swear, I would drop an F bomb with an ing in front of it, and then say egos, F-ing egos, meaning like people just aren't, you haven't, there's never been a discussion around, well, exactly, what decisions can I make by myself versus what decisions do I need to make to consult the partnership on? That's, problem number one. Problem number two is, I think my way ought to be the way to do it. Jack thinks his way ought to be the way to do it. And frankly, there's actually no right answer. Like there clearly is no right answer. It's literally just interpretation, but I want my interpretation and Jack wants his interpretation. We're just not willing to, we're not willing to do any compromise, whatsoever. And it just, and stuff like, and it's never like one big blow up, it's always, a series of, little flesh wounds, that then fester until, finally I'm septic, with infection all over my body. So my point in saying all that is that, nobody ever really wants to do it. But honestly, I think the best prescription for making things work, even if you're already in the middle of a partnership and you're like, hey, maybe we got to take that stuff seriously, would be, spend, the duration probably is about, 16 to 24 hours of good work. It doesn't have to be back to back. It could be a series of 4-hour meetings, a series of 2-hour meetings, but just really spending time on who does what do we get paid around here? What decisions am I okay with you making? What decisions you're okay with me making? How do we provide each other? Like, if I give you my input, Gary, but you don't listen to that, you don't listen to it. Like, is that, I mean, if it's your decision, then I should be good with that. Versus like, when do we really need to hit pause and have a discussion? I mean, like, working out all of those things, which, is the broad category of governance, because people write their operating agreements and they say, well, I have a governance document. It's in the operating agreement. But really what that is prescription for what happens when bad stuff happens, mostly is when you're going to refer to it, versus like, how do we actually operate to prevent the bad stuff from happening in the first place, which is what I'm talking about.
So you all should be glad that we're running out of time, because you now triggered something, and it's a book that I think you guys have read, because maybe you guys recommend it, but it was Never Split the Difference. And it is written by and I listened to it because that's how I read books now, is listening to it in the car, as I said, at 1.5x. But former FBI agent who was in charge of international negotiations for terrorism, hostage situations, etc. And it wasn't what I expected. I knew it was going to be something like, okay, psychology of negotiating, etc. But it was from the perspective of having negotiated very difficult situations in critical situations, meaning like, okay, hostage situations, and him explaining, getting to understand what is motivating the other side. And it's not always what it appears to be, okay, maybe, and it's not the conspiracy that you see, like, okay, the distraction, like there's a bank robbery, but really it was so that it draws the police to one place and then something else is going on somewhere else. It was, okay, understanding what was going on and the evolution of what is going on, and not thinking that, okay, their position at day one isn't the same position that they are having at day 9 or 10. For example, bank robbers who think they're going to get away and get caught, and now they are stuck. They have hostages, and then what do they want really? And apparently it took like 3 or 4 days, but finally he got through to them, and they said, look, I just don't want anything to happen to me, meaning get shot and get killed. I don't want anything to happen retribution-wise to my family. And if you can guarantee that, then I want out, and I will come out and give up. But prior to that, there was not a belief that the police would deliver that. And so they were doing what they thought they had to do to get away so that they wouldn't be harmed. And which sort of doesn't make sense, because they're like, what about the rest of their family, kind of thing? So they're kind of half of the equation. But it was very interesting understanding psychology and apply that to business scenarios, applying that to partnership relationships, as to when something goes poorly, what is motivating them? We've talked about people whispering into other people's ears, like, okay, hey, you know what? They don't value you. If you want out and they want you out, you should be getting paid a lot more than what they're offering. Or, okay, well, why are we making this business decision? Well, there's a short-term gain, and they're not seeing the long-term plan, and are not willing to wait for the long-term plan, because maybe they have been diagnosed with cancer. And so they, in their minds, and they haven't disclosed this, that they want to cash out and enjoy life because of this problem that they don't know. So getting to the root of the psychology of why people are acting or reacting the way they are in the moment is so important in getting to a resolution of a matter. So there is Dr. Jack's advice for today.
So speaking of Dr. Jack, I did a little research, and in Sarasota, Meany's Donuts has a 4.5 star on Yelp, but there is a Jack's Donuts down there in Sarasota, Adam. So just so you know, but it's only 4 star. And Jim Maraccio, just shout out to him. He sent us a donut chart. And if you have a 20-ounce bottle of regular Coca-Cola, it's like eating 6 donuts. Well, wow, And if you think, well, orange juice will just be fine. 12 ounces is 3.5 donuts. So kind of
That's
an
actually really funny.
Yeah, I responded back to
So-
him in his email and said, well, maybe my sugar coma was psychosomatic because apparently I was eating more healthy than I thought.
Evidently. Well, we're not
Yeah,
talking about the
what
saturated
I've noticed-
fat or trans fats.
yeah, man, I really noticed you're getting buff. I can really see your abs, Gary. I've been eating donuts, said Gary Never.
Yeah, that 8-pack of from the donuts.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, hey guys, thank you for joining us today. We'll put this up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel later on today. And Jack, you are on vacation too if you're up in Traverse City. Well, maybe you're visiting a.
That was a couple weeks ago over 4th of July.
Gotcha.
It was awesome. The Thunderbirds were there.
Oh,
And
how cool.
just a quick story. So there's 6 of them and they start out 4 + 2, 5 + 1. I thought all 6 of them were in front of me and they were doing one of their traditional moves. And then right when I'm like, wait a minute, we're 6 right over our heads from behind.
Wow.
And I should have known it, but I was standing on a stone waterway, almost fell in. I mean, it was that loud and it was super cool. I mean, those men and women are just incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's the most beautiful country. Some of the most beautiful country in the United States that is completely ruined by biting flies.
Yes. That's
Jack
true.
knows what I'm talking about.
Yes. And apparently they like Latino Italian blood more so. So, you know, that's just even worse.
Yeah, it's like I've never smelled like cutter more than when I was up there, man. It's like going through a bottle a night.
Mhm.
Terrible. All right, guys. Well, hey, Adam, drive safely back. Enjoy the rest of your time down there with your family in Sarasota.
Sure,
We'll
man.
see you guys.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
All right, see you guys. Bye.